The Zephyrian homeworld of Celestia Prime had known peace for over 3,000 cycles. Their crystal cities sparkled beneath twin suns, and their people lived in harmony with nature and technology. The Zephyrians were a gentle race, tall and elegant, with flowing silver hair and large, kind eyes that reflected the wisdom of ages. They had mastered the arts of healing, diplomacy, and sustainable living, creating a paradise among the stars. But paradise was burning. High Counselor Lyra stood on the observation deck of the Planetary Defense Station, watching in horror as massive bioships tore through their outer defenses. The Devourers had found them. These nightmare creatures from the dark void between galaxies consumed everything in their path, leaving only empty space where once thriving worlds had existed. "How many more worlds have fallen?" she asked her aide, Commander Zane, whose usually calm demeanor had cracked under the stress. 17 systems in the past lunar cycle," Zain replied, his voice trembling. "The Kadari Federation was completely consumed yesterday. 2 billion souls, gone in hours." The Devourers were unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. Each bioship was kilometers long, a living entity that fed on metal, energy, and organic matter alike. They reproduced by consuming planetary cores, spawning dozens of offspring from each world they devoured. Conventional weapons only seemed to make them stronger as they absorbed the energy and grew larger. "Have the Stellar Alliance fleets responded to our distress calls?" Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer from Zane's expression. "The Alliance forces encountered the Devourer vanguard at Proxima Junction," he said quietly. "Their combined fleet of 800 ships was overwhelmed in less than 6 hours. The survivors spoke of bioships the size of moons before the transmission cut off." Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her species' extinction pressing down upon her. The Zephyrians had always believed that diplomacy and cooperation could solve any problem. They had spent millennia building alliances, fostering peace, and sharing knowledge. But the Devourers could not be negotiated with, reasoned with, or appeased. They simply consumed. "There must be someone," she whispered. "Some species we haven't contacted." Zane hesitated, then pulled up a holographic display showing the galactic database. "There are the Outer Rim territories, the unexplored sectors, but most civilizations out there are either too primitive to help or—" He paused. "Or what? Or they're listed as hostile, aggressive, or dangerous. The Alliance has standing orders to avoid contact with many of them." Lyra studied the display, her finger hovering over various red-marked sectors. One caught her attention, a small spiral arm marked with multiple warning symbols. The designation read, "Quarantine Zone, Deathworld Species, Extreme Caution Advised." "What do we know about this sector?" she asked. Zane's eyes widened. "High Counselor, those are the Deathworlds, species that evolved in conditions so harsh that they're considered biologically impossible. The few Alliance scouts who made contact reported beings so violent and destructive that they had to retreat immediately. There's a planet called Earth where the dominant species apparently fights wars for recreation and considers their world peaceful, despite regular natural disasters that would end most civilizations. But they have ships? Technology? Unknown. The scouts were too afraid to get close enough for proper scanning. But the energy signatures suggested weapons capabilities far beyond Alliance standards. Lyra looked out at the approaching Devourer fleet. The massive bioships had finished consuming the outer moons and were now advancing toward Celestia Prime itself. She could see smaller swarms breaking off to attack the remaining defense stations. Each explosion was another piece of her civilization dying. "Send the message," she said finally. "High Counselor, send a distress call to this Earth. To anyone in that sector who will listen. Tell them we offer anything: technology, resources, knowledge, in exchange for their help. Zane's hands shook as he accessed the communications array. The message will take days to reach the Outer Rim, and even if they respond immediately, it will take time for any ships to arrive. We don't have days. Then we do what Zephyrians have always done, Lyra said, squaring her shoulders. We survive until help arrives. The next 3 days were hell. The Zephyrian fleet, designed for exploration and peacekeeping, threw themselves against the Devourers with desperate courage. Captain Vera led the cruiser Harmony into the maw of a bioship, detonating her reactor core inside its digestive chamber. The resulting explosion killed the creature, but spawned 3 smaller ones. The destroyer Peacebringer used its entire arsenal to blind a massive devourer, buying precious time for civilian evacuations before being consumed along with its crew. On Celestia Prime, the population huddled in underground shelters while the surface cities were systematically devoured. The devourers dropped acid from orbit, dissolving the crystal spires that had taken centuries to grow. Landing pods released smaller creatures that hunted through the ruins, seeking any source of energy or organic matter. Lyra remained at the command center, coordinating the defense and evacuation efforts. Reports flooded in from across the planet. The northern continent was 40% consumed. The oceanic cities were under attack. The sacred groves where the first Zephyrians had evolved were burning. "Any response from the Outer Rim?" she asked every few hours. "Still waiting," Zane replied each time, his voice growing more hopeless. On the 4th day, as the Devourer bioships entered the planet's atmosphere and began their final assault, something strange appeared on the sensors. "High Counselor," the sensor operator called out, her voice filled with confusion. "I'm detecting spatial distortions at the edge of the system. Multiple contact signatures emerging from what appears to be folded space." The main display flickered to life, showing the outer system. Points of light began appearing, small at first, then growing larger as they approached. But these weren't bioships. These vessels were angular, metallic, and moved with a precision that spoke of advanced technology and military discipline. "How many ships?" Lyra asked, hardly daring to hope. "I'm counting. Over 2,000 contacts, and more are still emerging. High Counselor, these vessels are massive. Some of them are larger than our entire space stations." The communications array suddenly crackled to life with an incoming message. The voice that emerged was harsh, speaking in broken galactic standard, with an accent unlike anything in the Alliance databases. "Unknown vessels in Celestia system. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. We received your distress call regarding hostile biological entities. Transmit your tactical situation and enemy capabilities immediately. We are moving to intercept." Lyra stared at the display in amazement. The human ships had crossed the system in hours, moving at speeds that should have been impossible. As they drew closer, the details became visible. These were warships, but unlike anything the galaxy had ever produced. They bristled with weapons, their hulls scarred with what looked like battle damage from countless conflicts. "Terran Fleet, this is High Counselor Lyra of the Zephyrian Republic. The hostile entities are biological ships that consume matter and energy. Our weapons have proven ineffective. They have already consumed 17 star systems and are currently attacking our homeworld." There was a pause, then the human voice returned, and this time it carried a tone that made even the approaching devourers seem less terrifying. "Understood. All civilian vessels clear the combat zone immediately. We are going to weapons hot. Warning to biological hostiles. You have 30 seconds to withdraw or be destroyed." Zane looked at Lyra in confusion. "They're giving the devourers an ultimatum?" Before anyone could respond, the human fleet opened fire. The space around Celestia Prime erupted in light and fury. Weapons that tore through space itself lashed out at the devourer bioships. Projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed punched through creatures that had shrugged off the Alliance's best efforts. Energy beams that seemed to burn reality itself, carved through bioships like they were made of paper. But the most shocking thing was the humans' tactics. Where the Alliance had tried to avoid collateral damage and minimize destruction, the humans fought like they were trying to end the universe itself. Ships rammed into bioships at tremendous speeds, their crews apparently unconcerned about their own survival. Others detonated nuclear devices at point-blank range, taking devourers with them in balls of atomic fire. "What manner of beings are these?" Zane whispered, watching a human ship half the size of a devourer somehow tear the massive creature in half with what appeared to be a magnetic field weapon. The battle raged for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The humans didn't just fight the devourers, they hunted them. Every time a bioship tried to flee, human vessels would pursue, running them down like predators chasing prey. When the devourers tried to spawn, human ships were waiting at the spawn sites with weapons designed specifically for sterilization. As the last devourer bioship was reduced to scattered organic matter, the human fleet took defensive positions around Celestia Prime. The flagship, a massive vessel scarred by weapons fire that would have destroyed any Alliance ship, moved into orbit. Admiral Chen's voice came over the communications array again, and this time Lyra could hear exhaustion beneath the authority. "Hostile entities neutralized. Celestia Prime is secure. High Counselor Lyra, we need to discuss the terms of our agreement and the location of the remaining Devourer fleets." "Remaining fleets?" Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh, yes," came the reply, and Lyra could hear something that might have been a smile in the human's voice. "We've been tracking these things for months. There are 7 more fleets, and they're all headed for Alliance space. But don't worry, we came prepared for a war." As Lyra looked out at the human fleet, she realized that the Zephyrians hadn't called for help. They had summoned something far more dangerous than the Devourers themselves. The question now was whether the galaxy was ready for what they had unleashed. The docking bay of the human flagship was unlike anything High Counselor Lyra had ever seen. The walls were thick metal plates welded together with what appeared to be battlefield repairs. Scorch marks and impact craters told stories of countless battles. The air itself tasted of metal, energy, and something else. Something that made her instincts scream that she was in the presence of apex predators. Admiral Sarah Chen met them at the airlock, and Lyra's first thought was how small the human appeared. Compared to the towering Zephyrians, Admiral Chen stood barely above Lyra's shoulder, with short dark hair and scars across her hands and face. But her eyes held a hardness that made Lyra want to step backward, and the way the other humans moved around her spoke of absolute respect, born from fear and admiration. "High Counselor," Admiral Chen said, offering a gesture that Lyra's translator identified as a respectful greeting. "Welcome aboard the UES Retribution. I apologize for the condition of the ship, but we came here straight from the Kepler incident." "The Kepler incident?" Commander Zane asked. Admiral Chen's expression darkened. "Rogue AI Collective decided humanity needed to be extinct. They were wrong." She gestured toward a conference room. "Shall we discuss the tactical situation?" As they walked through the ship's corridors, Lyra noticed the human crew. They moved with economic precision, no wasted motion, but their eyes held an alertness that suggested they expected combat at any moment. Many bore visible scars, prosthetic limbs, or cybernetic enhancements that were clearly military rather than cosmetic. The conference room was spartanly furnished, dominated by a holographic display showing the galaxy. Red markers indicated Devourer fleet positions, while blue dots showed human ship deployments. The scale was staggering, thousands of human vessels spread across dozens of systems. "Before we begin," Admiral Chen said, "I need to understand your people's military capabilities and whether you have any information about Devourer reproduction cycles." Lyra exchanged glances with Zane. Admiral, our people we prefer diplomatic solutions. Our military is primarily for peacekeeping and exploration. We've never encountered anything like the Devourers before. I see. Admiral Chen pulled up tactical data from the recent battle. Your ships have excellent shields and your crews showed remarkable courage, but your weapons are designed for non-lethal engagement. That explains the casualty reports. The hologram showed the battle in detail, and Lyra winced as she watched Zephyrian ships being consumed one by one. But then she saw something that hadn't been clear during the battle itself: the human ship's performance metrics. Admiral, these readings, your vessels were pulling acceleration forces that should have killed your crews. A grin spread across Admiral Chen's face, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Inertial dampeners, reinforced skeletal structures, and neural interfaces that let us handle G-forces that would turn most species into paste. Standard modifications for frontline personnel. You modified yourselves? High Counselor, on Earth we have a saying, adapt or die. We've been adapting for a very long time. The display shifted to show Earth itself, and Lyra gasped. The planet's surface was a patchwork of extreme environments: ice sheets that could freeze starships, deserts hot enough to melt metal, storm systems that dwarfed gas giants, and volcanic activity that would classify most worlds as uninhabitable. "This is your home world?" Zayn asked in disbelief. "One of them," Admiral Chen replied casually. "We've terraformed about 30 worlds to similar standards. Keeps us sharp." Admiral Chen activated another display showing human fleet compositions. Each battle group contains approximately 200 vessels, ranging from destroyer class to dreadnought class. We also have specialized units: infiltration ships, planet killers, AI hunters, and biological warfare containment vessels. Planet killers? Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "Sometimes a world can't be saved," Admiral Chen said matter-of-factly. "Better to destroy it quickly than let the suffering continue. The Devourers aren't our first galactic-level threat." She pulled up historical records, and Lyra's mind reeled at what she saw. Humanity had apparently fought and defeated 3 other extinction-level threats in the past 2 centuries. The Synthetic Collective, rogue AIs that had tried to digitize all biological life. The Plague Masters, a species that weaponized diseases across star systems. The Void Cult, beings from another dimension that fed on sanity itself. Each conflict taught us something new, Admiral Chen explained. The synthetics taught us to fight without technology. The Plague Masters taught us biological warfare. The Void Cult taught us psychological warfare. The Devourers are just another problem to solve. But the loss of life, the destruction, Lyra protested. Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. "High Counselor, I understand your people value life differently than we do. But sometimes the only way to preserve life is to become very, very good at ending it." She gestured to her aide, a scarred man with cybernetic eyes. "Lieutenant Morrison here lost his entire family to a Plague Master bioweapon. He volunteered for the experimental enhancement program that let us develop immunity treatments. Colonel Zhang, our biological warfare specialist, had her homeworld consumed by synthetics. She dedicated her life to developing anti-AI weapons." The lieutenant stepped forward. "Ma'am, we have a communication from Fleet Command. Admiral Petrov reports that Devourer Fleet Gamma has been located in the Andromeda Junction. They're moving toward the Altarian colonies." "Casualties?" Admiral Chen asked. 4 billion civilians in the projected path. Altarian Defense Force estimates 3 days before contact." Admiral Chen turned to Lyra. "High Counselor, the Altarians are part of your alliance, correct?" "Yes, they're a peaceful trading confederation. 43 worlds, mostly agricultural and scientific research stations. Lieutenant, signal Admiral Petrov. Deploy Task Force Ragnarok to Andromeda Junction. Authorization Chen 77 Echo. Tell him to remember the Titan protocols. Ma'am, Admiral Petrov requests permission to use Nova-class weapons if the conventional assault fails. Lyra's translator struggled with the term Nova-class, then provided a definition that made her blood turn cold. Admiral, your people have weapons that can destroy stars? High Counselor, we have weapons that can destroy entire star systems, Admiral Chen corrected. The Nova-class devices are actually our more restrained options. She pulled up another display showing weapon classifications. The scale went from conventional kinetics to something called reality enders at the top tier. Each level was marked with casualty estimates and deployment restrictions. We don't use these weapons lightly, Admiral Chen said, noting Lyra's horrified expression. But the Devourers reproduce by consuming stellar matter. Sometimes the only way to stop them is to deny them food sources. You would destroy inhabited systems? We would evacuate first, but yes, the mathematics are simple. Lose one system to save 100. The communications array chimed again, and a new voice filled the room. This one was younger, with a different accent. Admiral Chen, this is Captain Nakamura aboard the UES Indomitable. We've completed deep scans of the local Devourer remains. Analysis confirms these are Generation 4 bioships. They've adapted to conventional energy weapons and traditional kinetic attacks. Recommendations? Admiral Chen asked. Switch to Generation 6 countermeasures, quantum disruptors, reality anchors, and biological warfare protocols. We'll also need to deploy the surgeon ships for cleanup operations, Lyra interrupted. Generation 6 countermeasures? Captain, how many generations of these creatures have you fought? There was a pause. Then Captain Nakamura replied. High Counselor, we've been tracking Devourer evolution for 87 years. We've fought 17 different generations, plus their hybrid variants and specialized subspecies. This is actually one of the less dangerous strains. Less dangerous. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. The Generation 7 Devourers could consume energy itself. We had to develop weapons that operated outside normal spacetime to fight them. Generation 9 could replicate human technology. We lost 3 fleets before we figured out how to counter that. She stood and walked to a window showing the human fleet. High Counselor, your people called for help, but you need to understand what you've asked for. We are the species that survived when our sun went supernova. We are the civilization that turned a dead system into a thriving empire. We are the people who looked at extinction and said, try harder. The display shifted to show the remaining Devourer fleets, scattered across dozens of systems. Each represented billions of casualties if allowed to reach inhabited worlds. We will save your galaxy, Admiral Chen continued, but we will do it our way. That means total war. That means acceptable losses. That means decisions that your people would consider monstrous. Are you prepared for that? Lyra looked at the tactical displays, at the sheer scale of destruction the humans were preparing to unleash. But she also remembered the screams from Celestia Prime as her people were consumed, the helplessness of watching their greatest achievements devoured by creatures that felt no mercy. What do you need from us? She asked. Intelligence, Admiral Chen replied immediately. Star charts, population centers, evacuation routes, anything that can help us minimize civilian casualties while maximizing strategic effectiveness. And we need you to convince your alliance that we're here to help, not conquer. Will that be difficult? Admiral Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. High Counselor, we're about to deploy weapons that can unmake reality, ships that can ram through dimensions, and soldiers who consider dying for victory a Tuesday afternoon. Your alliance is going to be very, very afraid of us. She activated the communications array. All task force commanders, this is Admiral Chen. Execute Operation Galactic Cleanse. Rules of engagement are weapons-free, minimal collateral damage, maximum enemy elimination. Remember, people, we're not just fighting for Earth this time. We're fighting for everyone. As the human fleet began to disperse across the galaxy, each battle group heading toward a different Devourer incursion, Lyra realized the truth. They hadn't called for help. They had summoned the galaxy's most efficient killers and pointed them at an enemy that threatened everything. The question now was whether the cure would prove more terrifying than the disease. The war lasted 17 days. High Counselor Lyra stood in the command center of Celestia Prime, watching reports flow in from across the galaxy. The human fleets had spread like a plague of destruction, but unlike the Devourers, their plague was surgical, precise, and absolutely merciless. "Status report from the Altarian system," Commander Zain announced, his voice still carrying disbelief. "Task Force Ragnarok engaged Devourer Fleet Gamma at 347 hours. Enemy fleet eliminated in 6 hours and 37 minutes. Civilian casualties, 0. Human casualties, 12 ships lost with all hands, who rammed bioships to break their defensive formations." "They sacrificed 12 ships worth of crews?" Lyra asked. "Apparently it's considered a standard tactical option," Zain replied, consulting his datapad. The human captain transmitted honor and duty before impact. The other ships responded with, "See you in Valhalla." The holographic display showed the battle recordings. Human ships had surrounded the Devourer fleet in a formation that looked almost casual until the fighting began. When the bioships tried to break out, human vessels were waiting with weapons that seemed to unmake reality itself. Quantum disruptors tore apart the Devourer's molecular structure. Reality anchors prevented them from fleeing into folded space. And when conventional weapons failed, human ships simply accelerated to tremendous speeds and used themselves as projectiles. "Report from Admiral Petrov," came another update. "Devourer Fleet Delta engaged near Proxima Centauri. Human forces deployed biological warfare agents specifically designed to target Devourer genetic structure. Enemy fleet eliminated. Note, Admiral Petrov reports that human scientists developed these weapons in 48 hours based on biological samples from our battle here." Lyra shuddered. The humans had taken pieces of dead Devourers and, in less than 2 days, created targeted bioweapons that could kill creatures which had survived for millions of years by adapting to any threat. "Ma'am," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a broadcast from the Galactic Alliance Emergency Council. They're not happy." The main display shifted to show the Alliance Council chambers, where representatives from dozens of species were in obvious panic. Chancellor Vex of the Drakmari Confederation was speaking, his reptilian features flushed with fear and anger. "These humans are a threat to galactic stability. In 17 days they have deployed weapons we didn't know existed, demonstrated tactical capabilities that violate known physics, and shown a complete disregard for conventional rules of engagement. They must be contained." Ambassador Kira of the Centaurian Republic stood to respond. "With respect, Chancellor, they've also eliminated threats that our combined fleets couldn't touch. The Devourer fleets that terrorized 30 systems are gone, completely." "At what cost?" Chancellor Vex demanded. "They destroyed the Kepler system entirely, turned the star into a neutron star to deny it to the Devourers." The human Admiral Reyes called it acceptable strategic losses when there were still mining stations in orbit. "The mining stations were evacuated first," Ambassador Kira pointed out. "The humans spent 18 hours moving 3 million workers to safety before destroying the system. That's more care than the Devourers would have shown." The argument continued, but Lyra had stopped listening. She was watching tactical reports from across the galaxy as human forces finished their systematic elimination of the remaining Devourer fleets. Each engagement followed the same pattern. Overwhelming force applied with precision, minimal civilian casualties, and human casualties that would have broken any other species but seemed to only make the remaining humans fight harder. "High Counselor," Zain said quietly, "we're receiving a priority communication from Admiral Chen." The display shifted to show Admiral Chen aboard her flagship. Behind her, Lyra could see human crew members working at stations that looked like they belonged in a combat zone rather than a starship bridge. Warning lights flashed, and the background noise suggested ongoing repairs. "High Counselor Lyra," Admiral Chen said, "Operation Galactic Cleanse is complete. All Devourer fleets have been eliminated, along with their breeding facilities and resource caches. The galaxy is secure." "Admiral, the Alliance Council is concerned about your methods." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "I watched their debates. They're afraid of us. That's appropriate." "What happens now? Will your people remain in this galaxy?" For the first time since meeting her, Admiral Chen showed something that might have been amusement. "High Counselor, we never intended to stay. We came because you asked for help, and we don't abandon people who ask nicely." She gestured to someone off-screen, and Lieutenant Morrison appeared. "Lieutenant, what's the status of the withdrawal?" "Ma'am, all task forces are returning to designated rally points. Biological cleanup crews have finished sterilizing former Devourer sites. Intelligence teams have completed their galactic surveys. We're ready for departure within 72 hours. "You're leaving?" Lyra asked, surprised to feel something that might have been disappointment. "High Counselor, we're not conquerors. We have our own problems to deal with. There are reports of something called the Shadow Collective moving in the Andromeda Galaxy. And the Void Cult has been making noise in the Magellanic clouds. Plus, our scientists want to study the dimensional rifts we discovered in the outer dark." Admiral Chen paused, looking directly at Lyra. "But before we go, there are things your people need to understand about what happened here." The display shifted to show a tactical analysis of the entire campaign. Human fleet movements, engagement patterns, resource expenditure, casualty reports. The scale was staggering. "We deployed 47,000 vessels and 800 million personnel to save your galaxy," Admiral Chen said. "We lost 6,000 ships and 90 million people. For us, that's considered a very successful operation with minimal casualties." Lyra stared at the numbers. 90 million people died? "And they died knowing they saved trillions," Admiral Chen replied firmly. "That's what soldiers do. That's what humans do." The analysis continued. Weapons expenditure included reality-altering devices, dimensional disruptors, temporal paradox generators, and things with names that Lyra's translator refused to interpret. The logistics of moving such a massive force across the galaxy in a matter of days suggested technology far beyond anything the Alliance had imagined. "Admiral, the weapons you used? Some of them seem to operate outside known physics." "High Counselor, when you've faced extinction 16 times, you learn to think outside the box. We've had to develop technology that most species would consider impossible or immoral." 16 times? The Devourers were actually number 17. "We've also dealt with time-traveling conquerors, reality parasites, entropy gods, living mathematics, weaponized concepts, and something we call the color that should not be. Each threat taught us new ways to fight impossible enemies." Admiral Chen stood and walked to her ship's window, looking out at the human fleet. "Your people called us the Deathworlders' Doom Fleet. They weren't wrong. We are the fleet that brings doom to anything that threatens innocent life." She turned back to the camera. "But here's what your alliance needs to understand. We didn't come here to conquer or dominate. We came because someone asked for help. That's what we do. That's who we are." The communication shifted to show a wider view of the human fleet. Thousands of ships, from small destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed space stations. Each one scarred by battle, each one crewed by people who had chosen to fight impossible odds for strangers they'd never met. "We're leaving detailed tactical manuals and weapon specifications for your defense forces," Admiral Chen continued. "Not our most advanced technology, but enough to handle threats like the Devourers if they return. We're also leaving communication protocols in case you face something beyond your capabilities." "Will you come back if we call again?" Admiral Chen's smile was sharp, but not unkind. "Hi, Counselor. If you call for help, humans will answer. That's a promise. But next time, make sure you really want us here. Because once you call the Doom Fleet, there's no controlling what happens next." The communication ended, and Lyra stood in silence for several minutes. Around her, the command center buzzed with activity as Zephyrian forces began the massive task of rebuilding their civilization. But her mind was on the implications of what had just happened. "Commander Zane," she said finally, "compile a full report on human capabilities for the Alliance Council. Include everything: their weapons, their tactics, their casualty tolerance, their apparent immunity to the normal rules of physics." "Yes, ma'am. What should I conclude in the report?" Lyra looked out at the stars, where human ships were already disappearing into folded space, returning to whatever distant realm they called home. "Conclude that the galaxy just learned it has neighbors. Very dangerous, very capable neighbors who consider total war an acceptable response to requests for help." She paused, remembering something Admiral Chen had said. "And add a recommendation. If the Alliance ever again faces an extinction-level threat, we should seriously consider whether we want to summon the humans, because based on what we just saw, the cure might always be more terrifying than the disease." 3 days later, the last human ship departed Alliance space. They left behind empty battlefields where Devourer fleets had been utterly annihilated, detailed technical manuals that would advance Alliance technology by centuries, and a galaxy-wide understanding that somewhere in the dark, between the stars, lived a species that had turned warfare into an art form. The Zephyrians rebuilt their cities. The Alliance Council implemented new defense protocols based on human recommendations. Trade routes reopened, and life began to return to normal. But in the deep archives of every species' military, new files were created. Files marked with warnings about the Deathworlders and their Doom Fleet. Files that contained strict protocols for emergency contact and desperate recommendations about what kinds of threats justified calling for help from the humans. Because the galaxy had learned a fundamental truth. When you call for help from the species that considers extinction just another problem to solve, you better be absolutely certain that you can live with their solution. In the depths of space, heading back toward their quarantined territories, Admiral Chen stood on her bridge and received reports from her fleet commanders. Minimal damage, acceptable casualties, successful mission completion. Another galaxy saved, another extinction prevented. "Admiral," Lieutenant Morrison asked, "do you think they'll call us again?" Admiral Chen looked at the tactical reports showing 17 different potential galactic threats that intelligence had identified during their survey. "Lieutenant, this galaxy is young and soft. They've never faced real horror, real extinction-level threats. They will call us again." She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had looked into the abyss and decided to make it afraid of her instead. "And when they do, we'll be ready."